I've been married 3 years. My husband accepted me and my 3 kids from other men. But now that 2 are starting school, he says he can't cover everything and tells me to find their fathers to send money. I don't even know who they are. He didn't yell at me. He didn't hit me. He wasn't unfaithful. He just looked at me with that face of a responsible man and told me that he couldn't take care of everything anymore, as if my children were a bill that had expired. That day felt as if my skin had been torn off in front of the kitchen with the children playing and me trying not to cry so they wouldn't see me. And on top of that, he finished it off with the cruelest phrase on the planet, that I should look for the fathers to send money. That's when I knew this was going to get ugly and that I was going to have to protect myself no matter what. Manuel and I have been married for 3 years, but from the first day I felt that my marriage was more than a relationship, it was a refuge. I arrived with 3 children from other men with a history in pieces, and he swore to me that with him it would be different. At first, that seemed like a huge act of love, as if finally someone saw me as a person and not as a mistake. He repeated a lot that family is built, and I let myself be embraced by that idea like someone clinging to a plank in the sea. I got married believing that I had already paid enough for my youth and that now it was my turn for calm. The first few months were sweet in the everyday, those that feel safe. Manuel would get up early, make coffee, put on soft music, and I saw in him that stability that I never had. He would buy my children little things, and that broke my heart because I wasn't used to a man staying. I strove to be the good wife, the one who keeps the house nice, the one who doesn't complain, the one who is grateful. And yes, I was grateful, but I also got used to it, because when something is good for a long time, you start to think it's normal. There were also signs, but I've always been one to downplay what makes me uncomfortable until it explodes. Manuel has that way of talking as if he were giving a conference, as if life were a to-do list. He measures everything in expenses, in schedules, in have to. Sometimes he would tell me that I lived in the clouds, and he would say it as a joke, but those jokes always have venom. I let it go because I preferred a serious man to one who would make me cry for other things. Besides, I came from so much chaos that Manuel's rigidity seemed like a blessing to me. At home, the dynamic was always clear, even if no one said it out loud. I was the mom, but he was the provider, the one who paid, the one who solved. When there was a problem, he approached it as if it were a procedure and I as if it were a wound. I would talk to him about how I felt and he would respond with numbers. And over time I began to notice that he got tired of my emotions as if my tears were a luxury. That hurt me, but I told myself that love is also about enduring. My children grew up with him there and that gave me peace. The oldest already understands many things. The middle one is at that age where everything is questions and the youngest is still little and thinks the world is simple. I saw Manuel with them and thought that even if he wasn't their blood, he was their family. Sometimes he was tough, but I justified it by saying it was his way of caring. I preferred that discipline to returning to the uncertainty of my past. I didn't even want to remember the men who were before, because remembering them was touching something that burns me. I've always said that my youth was dark, and I don't say it for drama. I say it because my head really disconnects when I try to look back. I was lost looking for love in the wrong places and paying for attention with things I don't even want to name now. Don't ask me for names, exact dates, details, because my mind blocked it. It was trauma, it was survival, it was a time when I was another person or maybe no one. And Manuel knew that, or so I thought, because I explained it to him with tears the first time he asked me about the children's fathers. That's why it broke me so much the day he decided to bring up that topic, as if it were a normal conversation. 2 of my children are starting school, and instead of being excited or talking about uniforms, he blurted out that he couldn't handle everything anymore, that there was tuition, supplies, transportation, and that the logical thing was for the fathers to contribute. He said it as if he were talking about the electricity bill. I was frozen because for me it wasn't logic, it was opening an old wound with my hands. I told him that I don't even know who they are. And that's when he looked at me as if I were making an excuse. I tried to explain what it means for me not to know. It's not that I'm irresponsible, it's that I broke during that time and my head closed so as not to die. I told him that if he forced me to look for those men I would have a nervous breakdown and that he would be responsible for that. I didn't say it as manipulation. I said it because I really feel like I'm drowning when they pressure me with that past. It came out of me to say that I feel dirty every time he brings up the subject, and I said it crying, trembling, as if I were confessing a sin. I expected him to get scared and back down, because a man who loves you doesn't push you into the abyss. But Manuel didn't back down. Manuel hardened more. He told me that he loves me, yes, but that he didn't sign up to be the bank for 3 children forever. That phrase made me see red, because no one signs up to love, or so I thought. I reminded him of his promise. I told him that he swore to take care of me, that he became my husband with the whole package. I asked him if he now regrets me and my children, and he answered me with a silence that was worse than any scream. That's when I understood that he was already setting conditions for me. I cried for days, not for show, but because my world was falling apart. I would get up to make breakfast with swollen eyes, with that shame of your children seeing you sad and not being able to explain it to them. Manuel would come home from work and see me and seem to get irritated, as if my tears were another expense. I would tell him that his coldness hurt me, and he would say that what hurt was the month's bill. And in my head, I began to feel that he wanted to break me so that I would obey. And then he did the lowest thing. He stopped paying for the internet. Just like that, without warning, as a pressure tactic, as if I were a punished child. In my house, the internet is not a luxury. It's communication, homework, life, and he knew it. When I went to complain, he told me that if I wanted comforts, I had to bring solutions, not tears. That day I looked at him and thought that Manuel's love had fine print. He was cornering me against the wall, and I'm not one to be crushed without reacting. I can be many things, but helpless I am not. I told myself that if he wanted to play the logic game, I could play too. If he wanted me to solve it, then I was going to solve it, but in a way that would force him to feel shame for having pushed me. Because sometimes people only understand pain when you serve it to them on a platter and with guilt. Manuel had touched the one thing that should not be touched, and I had to protect my peace, my stability, my home, even if he didn't like the method. That's how it all started, with a man believing he could turn me into an accountant of traumas. Comments on the main story. Anonymous user 1 says, he supports you and 3 kids and you get indignant because he asks you for something basic that the fathers contribute. And the trauma thing sounds more like you don't want to take consequences because you conveniently don't remember anything when it's time to take responsibility. OP's response. How easy it is to write from comfort and judge as if life were an Excel sheet. I don't conveniently forget. I survived. And if you don't understand what it's like for your mind to shut down so you don't fall apart, then be grateful for your emotional privilege. Manuel promised to take care of us, not to make me relive the worst of my life as punishment for existing. If he doesn't have the minimum sensitivity to deal with a woman who has suffered, the problem is him, not me. Anonymous user 2 says, the worst part is that you threaten with a nervous breakdown to be left alone, but when they cut off your internet, then you have the energy to fight. Manuel isn't humiliating you, he's telling you that you can't do it alone and you're treating him like a villain for not being your ATM. OP's response. I don't threaten, I warn, because I do know my limits and I'm not going to pretend to be strong for people like you to applaud. And yes, the internet is a necessity, because my children also live here and I'm not going to let him punish them to bend me. If Manuel is tired, let him say it like an adult, and let's find solutions, not use me as a moral scapegoat with the father's issue. No one is going to make me feel guilty for having come out of my past alive. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since the last update, and I feel like the air in this house has become heavy, as if every wall were asking me for an account. Without internet, everything feels smaller, more enclosed, more humiliating, because even to distract the children I had to invent games and lies. Manuel walked around the house with that air of I'm winning, as if silence were his triumph. I saw him check his cell phone with data calmly, while I was left with nothing, and that lit me up inside. It wasn't just the money, it was the feeling that he was controlling me. I tried to be practical for a few days, I swear, but practicality in my life always lasts a short time when I feel cornered. I went to ask at the school about the costs, about the lists, and I had an anxiety attack just from seeing the numbers. I stood there looking at hanging uniforms as if they were a judgment. thinking that my children deserve to start with everything, like any child, not like those who don't have a father. That thought made me angry, because I'm not going to let my children carry the label of my mistakes. I left there with my head ringing and my chest tight. That night, Manuel insisted again with an irritating calmness that I should contact the fathers and that it was time to be responsible. I told him that I am already responsible because I raised them, I take care of them, I take them to the doctor, I hug them when they cry. He replied that that's the minimum and that money also counts. He spoke to me as if I were a capricious teenager, and that's when I felt that if I didn't do something drastic, he was going to keep escalating. Because Manuel, when he feels he's right, becomes a wall that crushes you. In the midst of that pressure, a vague image began to come to me, like a blurred memory of a party, of lights, of loud music, of people laughing, and something dark that I don't want to name. It wasn't a nice memory, it was more of a feeling like an emotional nausea. I kept thinking that at that time I moved in places where people of all kinds coincided, and suddenly, without wanting to, it came to my mind that Manuel, before being my boyfriend, had a large social circle of those men who think they're untouchable. That connection gave me an idea. I don't know whether to call it an idea or a defense mechanism. I'm not stupid. I know how the world works when you're a woman and they point fingers at you. If I went out looking for fathers, the only thing I was going to find was humiliation, men denying everything, people telling me I'm a tramp. On the other hand, if I managed to put the focus on something impossible to discuss, Manuel would be forced to swallow his demands. And that's where my mind did what it always does, look for the least painful way out for me, even if it seems crazy to others. I wasn't going to put my children through a wheel of unknown men. No, sir. So I told Manuel that I was having a memory regression, that fragmented scenes were coming back to me, and that I felt there was a connection with someone from his past. I told him crying, but carefully, like someone slowly dropping a bomb so it doesn't explode in their face. I told him that I remembered a party where I coincided with people from his circle before we were a couple. He got serious, as if he were finally taking me seriously, and I knew I had him because Manuel believes in what sounds like a clinical explanation, and I served it to him that way. Then I dropped the name of the dead man, his friend, who died in an accident years ago. I didn't say it as an accusation, I said it as a painful finding, as if it were breaking me to say it. I said that I believed that the father of 2 of my children could be him, that I had flashes, and that the universe sometimes brings back truths when you're ready. Manuel turned pale, as if he had been punched in the stomach. I didn't feel guilt at that moment. I felt relief because finally the pressure was shifting. Manuel started to cry, and I allowed myself to cry harder because in those kinds of situations the first one who cries wins the narrative. He hugged me and told me he didn't know what to say, that that friend was like a brother to him. I told him that I didn't want it to be true either, that I admired him, that it disgusts me to feel this way, and that's why my mind had blocked it. I painted myself as a victim of a cruel fate, and Manuel took the bait with a tear-stained face. For a moment, he stopped seeing me as an economic problem and saw me as a tragedy. The next day, Manuel was strange, as if possessed by a new responsibility. He talked about doing the right thing, about honoring the memory, about not leaving the children helpless. I listened and stayed still, because it was important not to seem calculating, but devastated. I told him I was afraid the deceased's family would hate me, that they would treat me like an opportunist. Manuel promised me that he would talk to them, that I didn't have to face anything alone. And there, with one sentence, he solved what he himself had created, the pressure. What I didn't expect was that Manuel would act so quickly, with that need to fix everything as if it were a moral procedure. He contacted the deceased's family to give them the good news that they had grandchildren. When he told me, I felt a strange coldness, because it was one thing to use a name as a shield and another to open the door of that house, but it was already done, and I couldn't back down without looking like a liar. So I went into offended victim mode, saying that I was ashamed, that I didn't want to cause pain, that I wished I could disappear. The family reacted as expected, with shock, with questions, with that mixture of sadness and hope that seemed dangerous to me. Manuel told me they were shocked, but that they were also happy to think that their son's son had left them something. I nodded with a face of suffering, but inside I thought that this was too much, because when people smell an inheritance they get intense, and I didn't want anyone in my house. I wanted money or help without invasion, not a new family scrutinizing my life. The following days were strange because Manuel stopped pressuring me to look for the fathers, but he started looking at me with other kinds of expectations, as if I were now a piece of a sacred story of his dead friend and not his wife. I felt watched as if everything I did could be interpreted. At the same time, I regained a little control because Manuel started paying for the internet again almost as a gesture of repentance for having pushed me. He told me he had done it out of desperation, and I let him feel guilty because guilt is a useful leash. But the calm was short-lived because a lie, when you feed it, grows and demands food. The deceased's family wanted to meet the children. They wanted photos. They wanted details. They wanted dates. Manuel would ask me things and I would pretend to be dizzy, that my head hurt, that it was too much for me. I began to feel trapped by my own strategy, but in my head it was still better than going out to look for real men. I preferred to deal with a grieving family than with strangers capable of humiliating me. At the end of those 2 weeks, Manuel was already emotionally committed to that idea, and that worried me because a committed man does stupid things for what's right, and I couldn't control how people would react. I would go to bed and think that the dead man was perfect because he can't deny it, but he was also dangerous because he can't confirm anything, and that arouses suspicion. And when suspicion enters, it becomes a fire. The only thing I wanted was for Manuel to stop looking at me as an expense and go back to looking at me as his woman, but now he was involved in a drama with ghosts. Comments on the update. 1. Anonymous User 1 says, you chose a dead man because he can't deny it, and on top of that you talk about trauma as a shield. That's not survival, that's being calculating. And the worst part is that Manuel cried and went to tell the deceased's family that they have grandchildren. I mean, you burst their grief for convenience. OP's response. You're so dramatic when you want to feel morally superior. I didn't burst anything. I shared a possibility that my mind gave me back when I couldn't take the pressure anymore. And if it bothers you that the universe works like that, well, that's a shame. Manuel also knew him. He also loved him. And if he decided to tell, it was because he wanted to do the right thing, not because I forced him. It hurts me more than anyone, because I'm the one who carries the weight of having lived that dark time. Anonymous User I says, and you also conveniently get dizzy when they ask you for dates and details? Basically, you made up a novel so they would pay for your internet and supplies without you lifting a finger. Manuel asked you for real help, and you gave him back a story with imaginary grandchildren to manipulate him. OP's response. They are not imaginary grandchildren. They are my children, real children who deserve stability. And if I had to find a way to protect them, I did. You talk as if I had a directory of men available to come and pay and ask for forgiveness, but life doesn't work that way when you've been used. And yes, I get dizzy because my body reacts, not because it's convenient for me, but of course, it's easier to call me a liar than to accept that there are men who leave invisible scars. If Manuel loves me, he should understand that I'm not up for interrogations as if I were a criminal. Update 2. It's been a month since the last update, and that month was like living with a black cloud over me because it wasn't just Manuel looking at me strangely. Now it was an entire family smelling blood around my children. The first week, I tried to keep everything in a calm mode, pretending it was a normal process, that everything could be handled with patience and a little tact. Manuel, who used to be cold, was now too emotional, as if he had taken the drama as a personal mission. He told me that the friend deserved justice, that the children deserved to know their origin, and I nodded with a face of pain, although inside I was only thinking about keeping the door closed. Every time the phone rang, I felt my heart in my throat, because I knew another question or a new demand was coming. The deceased's family started with innocent details, those that seem like affection, but are surveillance. They wanted recent photos of the children, they wanted to know who they looked like, they wanted to compare gestures with memories of the deceased. I sent 1 or 2 chosen photos, well lit, where the features were not too noticeable. Because I'm not naive. I know that people look with a magnifying glass when they want to appropriate something. Manuel got excited with each message as if that confirmed his theory. And I felt that he no longer saw me. He saw a kind of legacy that he had to manage. And while he was elevated in his fantasy of nobility, I was left alone with the real fear that this would turn against me and my home. The second week came the demand that I knew would come sooner or later. Proof. The deceased's grandparents said they were willing to help, but that they needed to confirm by DNA with them, because that way they could also open any procedure, inheritance, whatever. When Manuel told me, his face lit up as if it were a practical solution, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't an idea, it wasn't a rumor, it was already an action that could destroy everything. I told him no, just like that, and he looked at me as if I had kicked a grave. He asked me why, if I myself said I was sure, and there I had to change the game quickly. I knew that if I accepted that test everything would fall apart, and I would be left as the woman who invented grandchildren to take advantage. I was not going to be left with that role because I'm not a cartoon villain. I am a desperate mother defending what little she has. So I did the only thing I could do to cut off their momentum. I turned them into a threat. I told Manuel that that family doesn't want to help out of love, they want to appropriate my children. That this is typical, that first they offer you support and then they take them away from you. I told him that I was not going to allow my children to become a trophy of grief for people who don't even know them. And when I saw that Manuel hesitated, I pushed harder, because at that moment it wasn't about being delicate, it was about surviving. I started to say that they were attacking me, that they were treating me like an opportunist, that they wanted to use me as a retroactive incubator to revive the deceased. I cried in his face that I felt judged, observed, invaded, and that that test was not a test, it was a hook. I used words like violence and persecution, because there are terms that force people to react if they don't want to seem insensitive. Manuel tried to say it was normal, that without DNA they couldn't do anything formal, and I looked at him as if he had betrayed me again. I told him that he was taking their side instead of protecting his wife, that he had sworn to be my family, not the lawyer of others. The worst part is that the deceased's family started to get more direct, because when people feel you're hiding something from them, they get intense. They called Manuel, they looked for him, they told him that they had a right to the truth, that their son's son couldn't be left in the air. I heard Manuel talk and I noticed how his jaw tensed, because he was also feeling pressured from both sides. And I admit, enjoyed a little that he tasted what it's like to feel cornered, because he had done that to me first. If he wanted me to relive traumas to settle accounts, now he was going to live the stress of sustaining a story without control. It was his emotional consequence, and I was not going to save him from it. On an impulse, I was the one who wrote to them, not to all of them, but to an aunt of the deceased who was the most insistent. I sent her a long message with the most indignant tone I could, saying that my children were not a procedure or a piece of inheritance, that I was not going to allow them to be torn away from me with tests and papers. I told them that I had suffered enough for them to now want to use me, and that if they continued to pressure me, I would report them for harassment. I'm not one to stay quiet when I feel a threat, because staying quiet is opening the door. And what I felt was that they were already sizing me up to enter my life. That message exploded like gasoline on fire, because the family was offended and began to say that I was hiding something. They told Manuel that I was not reliable, that why would someone refuse if they were sure? Manuel confronted me, but no longer with the coldness of before, but with a new doubt in his face, as if an alarm had gone off. He asked me if I was making it up, if the memory was real, or if I was looking for an easy way out. I was offended with all my might, because offense is a perfect shield when you are being cornered. I told him how dare he question my pain, that was the cruelest thing a husband can do, that he was invalidating my trauma again. Manuel fell silent, but I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. Cold distrust. It was no longer the Manuel who felt guilty and hugged me. It was the Manuel who is adding pieces and noticing that they don't fit. I tried to soften, I cried. I said that my mind is not exact, that memory does not work as he wants, that I recovered what I could. I told him that the fact that I don't want DNA does not mean that it is a lie. It means that I want to protect my children from a system that would treat them as property. And he, instead of giving in, told me then how are we going to solve the economic issue. That made me feel that he had only changed masks from the insensitive to the justiciar, but just as hard on me. One night I saw him acting strangely with his phone, like hiding it, like writing when I wasn't looking. I pretended I didn't care, but my body went on alert. Manuel can be many things, but he's not stupid. And when a man starts to keep quiet, it's because he's looking outside for what he no longer believes inside. I had no proof, but I can read the air of a house because I've lived through too many storms. I started to hear his tone with someone, like whispered, like asking for help, and I knew he was investigating me. One day I found a missed call from David on Manuel's cell phone when he went to take a shower. David is Manuel's brother, and he's not someone who's always present, because between them there's an old rivalry of those that are noticeable even if they say they're not. Manuel always talks about David as if he were the example of what not to be. Irresponsible, lazy, envious. I've never wanted him around because David's energy has always been strange, like someone who looks too much. Seeing his name there ignited a dry fear in me, because if Manuel resorted to him it was because he was already desperate and willing to break rules. And I knew that David was not going to come to save anyone. David was going to come to complicate everything. I started to pressure Manuel to tell me who he was talking to, but he didn't bite so easily anymore. He replied that he was looking for information to help us, as if I were the one who didn't want solutions. That infuriated me because he was painting me as an obstacle, as if I were the crazy one who doesn't cooperate. I told him that if he dared to bring his brother into our house, it would be the end, because I was not going to allow a stranger to interrogate me about my life. Manuel looked at me with that "you're giving yourself away" face and went to sleep on the couch. That night I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, feeling that the lie was no longer just a shield, it was a rope. The deceased's grandparents were still insisting on the DNA and Manuel was still putting them off without knowing what to do because he was trapped too. I saw how his patience was running out and how his suspicion was lighting up. The house became a silent battlefield, one of those where no one screams, but everyone hates each other with their eyes. I kept telling myself that I did what I had to do, that if Manuel hadn't pressured me, I wouldn't have had to resort to this. But a part of me, the part that doesn't speak out loud, knew that something worse was coming. And when a man calls his brother to investigate, it's because he has already decided that he doesn't trust you, and that's a point of no return. Comments on Update 2. Anonymous user 1 says, "You refused the DNA because you know it was a lie, and on top of it you accused the grandparents of wanting to steal your children. How shameless. You invented dead man as a father, and when they ask for proof you play the victim and scream harassment. You're not protecting anyone, you're covering for yourself." OP's response. You talk as if DNA were a magic wand that doesn't bring emotional or legal consequences. I'm not refusing out of guilt, I'm refusing out of maternal instinct, because I do know how quickly people turn children into objects when they smell a strong story. If they pressure me and attack me, of course I'll defend myself, because no one is going to come and set conditions for me about my children as if I were a rented incubator. And if you don't understand the difference between protecting and covering up, it's because you've never had to defend what's yours with your nails. Anonymous user 2 says, "The best part is that you blackmail Manuel to defend you when you yourself got into this drama. And now you're annoyed that he doubts, but you're the one who writes messages threatening to report a grieving family. Manuel should run away, and I hope he takes the children with him because you're unstable." OP's response. Look how quickly you want to take children away from a mother. That's exactly why I don't trust those people or mentalities like yours. Manuel is my husband. His duty is to protect me when I'm attacked, not to take the side of strangers just because they cry pretty. I don't blackmail. I demand the minimum of loyalty because loyalty is what differentiates a marriage from a business partnership. And if Manuel is doubting, he should first ask himself why he pushed me to relive things that destroy me instead of taking care of me. Update 3. It's been 2 weeks since the last update, and those 2 weeks were the final collapse, the kind of collapse that leaves you breathless and without pride at the same time. I already felt that Manuel was strange, but I wasn't ready to see the physical proof that we were no longer a we. He started coming home late, talking little, looking at me as if he were trying to figure out which part of me was real. And I, as much as I pretended to be strong, had my stomach in knots all the time, as if my body knew what was coming before my head did, because when a lie is about to fall, the air changes and I felt it on my skin. One Thursday afternoon, When the children were in their room watching videos with the newly returned internet, there was a strange insistence at the door. I opened it and saw David, Manuel's brother, with a folder in his hand and a face so serious that it seemed like he was coming to announce a death. David has always given me a bad vibe, because he's one of those men who look at you as if they already know you, even if they've never spoken to you. He came in without asking for permission, as if the house were his, and I felt an immediate humiliation. Manuel came behind with red eyes and a rigid jaw, as if he had been swallowing something sour for days. They didn't sit down immediately. They stood there, and that scene was already a judgment. David opened the folder and began to take out papers with a cruel calmness, like someone who enjoys having control. He said he needed to talk to me about the dark time. He called it that with those words, and I felt like throwing something at him. Manuel didn't say anything. He just breathed heavily, as if he were holding back nausea. I tried to speak first. I said I wasn't going to allow interrogations, that my children were in the house, that this was a lack of respect. David cut me off with a dry sentence, saying that respect is lost when lying becomes a habit. That sentence pierced me because it wasn't a stranger, it was Manuel's blood, and that means he was already inside the conflict. Then David confessed just like that, without beating around the bush, as if dropping a bomb were the most natural thing. He said that years ago, at that party I vaguely remembered, I had a one-night stand with him. He said it was a party where people wore masks or it was very dark and that at that moment neither of them knew who the other was. I felt the blood drain from my face because my body does remember things my mind tries to erase. Suddenly a feeling of perfume, of music, of hands came to me and I wanted to disappear. David said that over time he began to connect the dots with dates, with my fragmented stories, with the children's ages, and that when Manuel started with the deceased, it sounded to him like a smokescreen. I tried to deny it out of reflex, because denying is the first instinct when you are cornered, but David was already prepared. He said it wasn't just a suspicion, that he had done a secret DNA test with a hairbrush of the children. He said it as if it were a magic trick. And I felt a mixture of disgust and panic, because that meant someone had touched my children without my permission to prove a point. David held up the paper as if it were a trophy and said that he is the father of the two older ones. In that second, everything I had built came undone because the unknown father was not outside. He was there standing in my living room, and on top of that he was my husband's brother. Manuel, who had been still, suddenly bent forward as if he had been punched in the stomach. He put his hand to his mouth and ran to the bathroom. And I heard the most horrible sound, him vomiting, as if his body were rejecting reality. Something broke in me, not from guilt, but from terror, because I knew what that meant for him. Manuel was not hearing that I had made a mistake. He was hearing that he had raised his own brother's children, the brother with whom he has a historical rivalry. For a man like Manuel, that is not just betrayal, it is family humiliation. It is defeat in his own name. I wanted to continue controlling the narrative, because if I lost control, they would destroy me. I started to say that I didn't know, that it was dark, that it was a time when I was not well, that it was not personal. I told David that if he knew something, why didn't he say it before? And he shrugged his shoulders as if life were a game. He said that he didn't know until now either, and that besides, if he had said it, Manuel would have killed him. Manuel came out of the bathroom pale with red eyes and looked at me with a mixture of hatred and disgust that I never thought I would see in him. He told me that I had brought the enemy into his house from day one, and that sentence hit me like a brick. I told him that I love him, that he is my husband, that he is the father in practice, and that should weigh more than DNA. I told him that I was not unfaithful during the marriage, that was before, that it's not the same, because he didn't even know me. Manuel laughed, but it was an ugly, broken, humorless laugh, and he told me that I had used his kindness as a cushion. He told me that I had sold him a story so that he would carry what other men had left, and that on top of that it now turns out that the other man is his brother. I tried to cry and get closer, but he raised his hand so I wouldn't touch him, as if I were something contaminated. That's when I felt the real humiliation, the one that makes you feel small. David, instead of leaving, began to speak as if this were an opportunity for him. He said that now that it was known, he had the right to be with his children. He said that blood rules, that the universe arranges what was hidden, and he began to act as if I owed him space. Manuel looked at him with contempt, because between them the hatred already existed, and this only added fuel to the fire. I saw two brothers on the verge of destroying each other, and I felt in the middle like a dirty trophy. Manuel grabbed some things, not many, just the basics, and said he was leaving, that he couldn't breathe in that house. And he left, without looking back, with a coldness that seemed cruel to me, because after all he was the one who had promised to stay. That night I was in shock trying to think of solutions, but there were no pretty solutions. Manuel was not answering calls. The deceased's family was already on another planet, and David stayed here as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The next day he showed up with a backpack and said he was moving in temporarily, that it was his right to be close to his children. I told him he needed to contribute money, that this was not a camp, and he was offended as if asking for responsibility was insulting him. He told me that he was processing and that he couldn't work under pressure. And that's when I understood the cruel joke of the universe. I exchanged a provider husband for a parasitic brother-in-law. David began to take up space, the couch, the kitchen, the air, and I began to feel that my house was no longer my house. The children looked at him strangely because they know Manuel as a figure, not David as anything. David tried to play dad suddenly, but without real authority, only with that feeling of ownership. I found myself correcting him all the time because he doesn't know routines, he doesn't know schedules, he doesn't know discipline, and he got angry when I told him something. He accused me of wanting to control him as if I didn't have the right to set rules in my own house. Manuel, meanwhile, was still missing, and that absence felt like a punishment. The most desperate thing was to realize that economically everything was falling apart. Manuel was the one who supported the home, and without him the bills began to look like monsters. I tried to talk to David about money, about school, about responsibilities, but he acted offended and said that I was treating him like a wallet when he doesn't even bring a loaf of bread. He told me that he was here for paternal love, and I thought that paternal love doesn't pay tuition. I began to miss even Manuel's rigidity, because at least the rigidity came with stability. With David, the only stable thing was his laziness. The cherry on top of the horror was when David hinted that if Manuel didn't come back, maybe we could work things out in a different way, as if life were a repeat. He spoke to me in a tone that was too familiar, too confident, and I felt disgusted. I told him not to get confused, that he was here for the children, not for me. He laughed and said that I've always been good at denying what's convenient for me. I was frozen because I realized that David was not an accident. David was a constant threat inside my house. And I, who have always thought myself capable of handling situations, was trapped with a jobless man, with biological rights, and with a husband who hates me. I tried to call Manuel one last time that week, and when he finally answered, his voice was cold, as if I were a stranger. He told me he's not planning to come back, that he needs distance, that he can't even look at David. I begged him for the children's sake, not to punish them for something that happened before, but he told me he loves them, yes, but that he can no longer look at me without disgust. That was what hurt me the most, because I always thought that love was stronger than disgust. He hung up on me, and I was left with the phone in my hand, feeling that life had charged me for everything at once. Now I'm here with the house full of strange silence, with David sleeping as if nothing had exploded, and with two children who legally are his, even though emotionally they are not. School is upon us. The bills too. And I feel that I'm paying for having trusted a man who promised to support me and for having had a youth that still haunts me. The worst part is that I know this doesn't end here because Manuel didn't just leave. Manuel left hurt, and a hurt man doesn't leave in peace. I know something else is coming, and I don't know if this time I'll be able to control the narrative. Comments on Update 3. Anonymous User 1 says, Karma hit you straight in the face. You invented a dead man to get money and ended up revealing that the father was the brother of the guy who supported you. And on top of that, you complain that Manuel vomited and left, as if he had to stay to applaud the humiliation. You didn't bring the enemy into the house. You invited him and set the table for him. OP's response. How cruel you are to give an opinion when you have no idea of the emotional context of a real life. I didn't invent for money. I tried to protect my children from a system that was going to destroy them. And this David thing was a dark coincidence that neither of us could have foreseen at the time. Manuel also chose to marry me knowing that I came with wounds, and now he decides to abandon 3 children because his pride won't let him breathe. That says more about him than about me. If he left, it wasn't for love, it was for ego. Anonymous user I says, the most disgusting part is that you're still talking about protection while David has moved into your house and contributes nothing. You're without Manuel because you played with guilt, and now you have to live with a parasite that you yourself brought with your silences. I hope Manuel asks for a divorce and leaves you and David to pay for the school because you've already abused enough. OP's response. I love how you celebrate abandonment as if it were justice. What a miserable mentality. David didn't move in because I invited him. He got in because Manuel brought him with his investigation. So if you want to point fingers, point them all. Not at your convenience. And I'm not going to let my children be left without school with or without Manuel because I am the one who is here facing it every day. If Manuel thinks he can wash his hands and disappear, let him remember that he was the one who said he was family. And I don't forget promises so easily.